Our complete library of episodes is available for free at spotlightonpodcast.com/episodes. There you'll find all of our conversations stretching back to our launch in February of 2020. Check it out. Hello and welcome to Spotlight On, the companion podcast of Tonearm.com. Here we talk with the musicians, writers, and innovators shaping media, art, and culture. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today, the spotlight shines on drummer and composer Gustavo Cortiñas. Gustavo's latest album, The Crisis Knows No Borders, tackles climate change head-on through music that's both urgent and beautiful. Working with guitarist Dave Miller, saxophonist Jon Irabagon, and violinist Mark Feldman, Gustavo's created compositions that explored how global warming sparks conflicts, drives migration, and connects us all, whether we like it or not. The Chicago-based artist has built a career using jazz as social commentary, and this new project feels especially timely as we face a world where environmental challenges refuse to respect any boundaries. And now, Gustavo Cortiñas. Something I'm really curious about is the span of time from when you conceived the album and recorded it to the differences in our world now that it's out, and to not beat around the bush. I mean, I'm assuming, given the timeline, you conceptualized and worked on this before the 2024 election.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now that we have a different regime with much different priorities, I'm curious how the project sits for you now. I think I'm asking you a feeling question, less than an intellectual question, or more than an intellectual question.
Yeah. The project was already low on hope to begin with. Like, the last song is Meditation on the End of Times.
Yeah.
I have an ongoing feeling that convenience keeps getting in the way of even small sacrifices that all of us can do to save the world. I don't think that's a new thing. I don't think that's a pre-2024. It's very small decisions that we make on a daily basis to make the world better, not only in terms of the environment, but like our society in general, our relations, both economic as well as personal and whatever, those types of things kind of keep getting in the way always, Capitalism, or maybe democracy, if you will, is a little too idealistic to leave the decisions that will save the world to everyday people who are continuously being pressured by this system, like people who have to decide whether to buy an environmentally sustainable good or buy the cheaper good when they're already struggling to pay rent and whatnot, all these little decisions. And those are like the most dire things, but then there's the do I recycle? It's a little hard. Do I turn off the light while I'm do I fix this dryer for $250 and have no guarantee? Or I go get a new one for $500 with a 5-year warranty. Everything's kind of stacked against the world already as it is, and it makes the decisions really hard on us and our neighbors, or on like us regular people down here, And then if that wasn't already enough, now I guess the added thing is that not only it's like those small decisions, but now we have, there was a small but meaningful, at least meaningful approach from the prior administration to do something about this. And now there's a complete 180, and it's just trying to make a buck and flip everything in the direction of money. So it feels maybe a little bit more, it was already, like I said, it was already a little hopeless.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a little more heartbreaking talking about these issues nowadays.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there, obviously. There's so many examples of what you just talked about. You listed some of them. I think about another one that comes up a lot when I talk with artists is, streaming music. this miracle of spending $10 a month and having the universe of music available is such an incredible joy until you scratch the surface and talk to artists and other people who make their lives in the creative fields. It's been very interesting for me over really in the last 6 to 9 months in my conversations here, to hear how many artists who are, especially, in the creative music field, or independent artists who are saying, I don't need the algorithm because I'm not making music designed to be a million seller. Why even bother then? Why swim in that pool? It's really interesting to hear how, artists are coming around to some of those realities as well and just opting out. And I fully appreciate, in addition to the list of things you articulated and the empathy with which you framed the way people have to make the decisions, everybody has to make their own choices, but ultimately the incentives are what are broken, right? Like, to hear you talk about some of the things on that list, like, how I'm going to badly paraphrase, but I've heard that the statement of something about like tax policy reflects our morals and ethics, or reflects our priorities. It would be so easy to subsidize different things, subsidize fixing your dryer, if we decided that was important, or stop subsidizing other things. It's part of this like scarcity mentality that we have in Western society that's just so not true. Like, there's enough to solve so many problems. It's just the will that seems to be in short supply. It's not capital. It's not smarts. We have lots of that. Anyway, I'm ranting at you.
Hey, preach. We see this every day. We see it in the supermarket. People packing peeled oranges in a plastic container. Why is that? All these little systems that you said, is like they're not being subsidized, And then the problem is that also the other stuff is being subsidized. And that's like the thing, is like these sustainable practices that should be subsidized are kind of left on their own to see if the market willfully wants to pick them up. And then all these other things, be it through unsustainable agricultural practices, or everything that we're witnessing with like the petrochemical industry and all that stuff, gets huge subsidies, and or like transportation, Anyway, all of that is like, help us out a little bit.
Yeah.
And even sadder than what you say is that, because you say like is our tax policy a reflection of our morals?
Yeah.
And like, are we that depraved? Maybe we are, but like, I have a more of an inkling that actually the governments tend to pick and choose when they reflect our morals. Doesn't matter which party it is, I mean, we talk about this on the topic of abortion, for example, how like a great majority, regardless of party, a majority is okay with abortion, but we don't want to do that, gun control.
Yeah.
Healthcare, all these things where like the morality is actually way ahead of where our political structures let us go.
Yeah. I think the great example of that from our somewhat recent history is the civil rights movement. It took so long to drag the Supreme Court and the executives and the legislative branch to where the public led the civil rights movement. The public demanded the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. It wasn't some inspired leadership, or great act of courage.
Exactly. It's coming from below. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not top down like they like to say economics and all this other stuff works. It's always from here.
It's interesting. I live just outside of Seattle. I moved here from New York City several years ago. Seattle was kind of late to the game in developing light rail. There's like this regional light rail project that, it's like the never-ending project. The city's now pretty connected with it, but now they're starting to connect the outlying areas. And, there's all the talk you'd expect of like, it's $1 million a foot or whatever it is. There's all kinds of sniping about the light rail project. I think it's the most beautiful aesthetic thing that I've seen around here, other than the natural beauty. But like, when I see the light rail at night and the curvature of the track and the train rises up, and it's kind of quiet. It's not, it's not the roar of like the elevated subways in Chicago or New York. It's sort of beautiful. And every time I see it, I'm like, man, and it's like lit in a really beautiful way. It's got this aesthetic to it that I'm like, I love the light rail. I love taking it. I love looking at it. I love watching them extend it. I love looking at the construction site. I don't know. And it's apropos of nothing. It's a complete non sequitur, but the solutions aren't like always inconvenient and aren't always ugly and aren't always a sacrifice.
They only are when you let infrastructure get run down. You don't connect it. Like the L is a good example. Talk about a subway system that works as a web. Everything goes in, nothing goes around like this. So if you want to just take the train, you have to always connect through downtown, or you have to take the bus system, which in my experience can sometimes be a little untrustworthy. And then there's like the problem of how that infrastructure is run down. It's not quite like the one you said. The carts are run down. The tracks need maintenance, need updating. We're not prioritizing that. We're repaving the street for the 10th time in 10 years,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or expanding the damn highway. And it's like, I feel like I heard this 20, 30 years ago, and I'm no expert in this, but I feel like the theorists behind like traffic study, game theory, mathematicians, they know that every time you add a lane, it just fills right up. Like you're not expanding capacity, you're expanding the motivation to drive. It's just like we know these things, we know them, but it looks like you're doing something when you make a highway. It looks like you're doing something.
And the bottleneck stays the same too.
Yeah.
It's all just going to go out there, and that one traffic light in downtown Chicago is going to stop everybody as it always does,
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like our conversation is going to meander between what I'll call the aesthetic as well as the topical or the social or the political. I'm kind of curious about the specific musicians as well as the specific combination of instruments that you chose to address the themes on this album. Is there a connection?
Starting with the musicians, I'd say that this project came from a little whimsical kind of like idea. I had played with both Dave and Mark and had some hangs with them here in Chicago. I've heard Jon many times, and all of them are like people who I deeply admire, often on the bandstand, Got this opportunity for a gig, and I was just like really just imagining what not even those instruments, but those people would sound like together. I was just like, man, I'm just going to give them a call, and if they can make this gig, I've got about 3 months. I've got some ideas for this music already. I'm going to write a whole new set of music with these ideas and these concepts for these people that I've been trying to do before this gig. And the inspiration was very much there. So the stuff just kind of like flew in that direction. I will say that a lot of it was me thinking from the perspective of who was on the project rather than what instruments were there. I think those people play themselves more than they play their instruments, So I think that's pretty special. I definitely wanted the aesthetic to be quite flexible, to go beyond any particular genre. And I wanted it to pack a punch. I wanted definitely some aggressiveness, so that like the guitar, maybe that came, but all of those guys, the incredible thing about these guys is that they have the spectrum to play the most delicate, beautiful thing you've ever heard, and also the ability to smack you right in the face and shock you with what they play, And I think that's kind of like what I wanted this project to be.
you tell me a little bit about the intellectual environment that you grew up in, parents as educators and sort of thoughtful thinking people, and how and if that informed sort of your approach to using music as social commentary?
It definitely is like foundational. It's not something that I thought of growing up or even when I first started in music. It's just something, it's more of a, honestly, it's more of a hindsight situation. Like, I find myself now doing the things that I am doing, having a dialogue with certain ideas. And then when I start tracking those ideas within me, within my steps, I, it leads to my family. It leads to conversations we had, to books they recommended, to things that I was hearing or seeing at home and around with them, with their friends,
Mm.
the environments that they exposed me, you know, the ideals that were forged around our house. Yeah, both my parents were educators, incredibly liberal people, very compassionate, very dedicated. I remember giving a speech at my dad died in 2011. He was like an intellectual of the highest degree, and in his house, in his apartment, you could not see a wall. It was all books,
Yeah.
you know. So after he passed away, me and my two brothers and my mom, we grabbed a few books that were meaningful to us and to our thing, and the rest of the books were enough that we donated them to the university where my dad used to teach, and they started a library in his name at this university, and we had to give a speech. My mom said, I can't do this right now. You know, she was there, but she's like, can you talk? Yeah. And I agreed to do the speech, but I had a conversation with her about what should be the content on it and what should we emphasize. And she told me something that she said that my dad used to emphasize a lot, which was this idea of, he was a law professor. And it was this idea of exercising law as a science with a conscience, which in Spanish also rhymes, by the way. so so it's, but this idea of practicing your science, your craft from a perspective of conscience. And I thought that was very poignant. It really resonated with me.
Wow.
And I feel like it's something that I try to implement as well in the way that I walk.
Yeah. Yeah. That very much resonates. Interesting aside, my dad also passed away in 2011. He was involved in the law, but in a different way. He was a policeman my whole life. He was retired when he passed away, but also for his generation, he was one of the first policemen in his area, in his town, I guess, who was actually educated. Because before him, before his generation, it was kind of a blue collar job to go into law enforcement. And now I think it's much more mixed in that you'll get people with criminal justice degrees or who went to college. Yeah, it's very interesting that notion of your craft with a conscience or through the lens of conscience and consciousness. That is very resonant in your work. Similarly, can you talk about the musical influences that you grew up around? My understanding, I have here in my notes that there was a diversity of music as well as thought in your world. Can you talk about that a bit?
Absolutely. Some of the first music that I remember is Mexican music, wide variety. The things that stick closer to home for me is folkloric music
Mm.
from Mexico and Latin America, especially the great singers who also carry a huge air of consciousness and social justice in them. Chabela Vargas is one of my favorite all-time singers. Mercedes Sosa, Violeta Parra, all those great Latin American singers, super important. Rock en español was a huge thing also. Anything from Café Tacuba, which is a great Mexican rock band that also like fuses Mexican folk with all these other contemporary
Hmm.
styles, but also Jaguares and a band called Molotov and Soda Stereo, all these bands that also have these songs that speak about our history and our trajectory. As a teenager, I got really into punk, and that's a whole other side of rebelliousness that really resonated. And I had a couple punk bands growing up in Mexico. We wrote our own music and lyrics, and it's all from this very naive perspective of social consciousness. But but we started then making music already in that perspective. Also grew up listening to the Beatles. My mom hired my neighbor, who was basically my age, 4 years older than me, to teach me English. And he taught me English with the lyrics of the Beatles. And that's how I started getting into the Beatles a lot. And then it turned out that my mom loved them too. And then so it became a thing. So all of that music was very present. My dad, he would put on, upset all the neighbors. We lived in an apartment complex. He had a big stereo, and he had all this classical music, and he would be bouncing off like Beethoven and Wagner and all this stuff
Oh, amazing.
while the stereo would be here, and the bathroom would be like on the other side of the apartment. Not a huge apartment, but still. And he would be showering, and he would be playing Beethoven or Wagner and stuff like that while he was showering.
So the volume was up.
Yeah, while it was driving for sure. So all of that stuff. My dad actually took me to see the Ring Cycle, Wagner's Cycle. They did this thing in Mexico City where they came once a year, and they brought one of the, I don't know what you call them, chapters.
Cycles.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so I was exposed to that. So yeah, very varied array of music. Honestly, jazz was not really at home. Jazz is something that I picked up through my study of the drum set and connecting with different people. So jazz is more of an afterthought in my upbringing. You could say it's not something that I knew of before I was 15 years old, for example. I feel like I always was fascinated with percussion. We used to have one of these music classes where they give you a bunch of crappy instruments and we would do something. I can't even remember what we did with them, but I remember that I always this is a funny story I like to tell, but it's like I had this like little medallion that I bought at the pyramids in Teotihuacan once as a kid. And it was like from the Pyramid of the Sun. And I just remember I would like hold that medallion and be like, can I get the coconuts? Can I get the coconuts? And there's like these coconuts that you would bang and stuff like that. So from then on, I like was fascinated with percussion. And I remember being completely paranoid and very scared of picking up the recorder, which everybody has to pick up the recorder in Mexico at least. Yeah. So like this scared the crap out of me, you know, but percussion never did. And at some point around the time that I was 10, a little earlier, my brother picked up the drums. And so he was taking it. And I always wanted to do everything that my brother wanted to do. That was a little bit of an incentive. And one day he was late to his drum lesson. And my dad was like, well, and it was at home. It was an in-home lesson. The teacher came. So my dad was like, well, I'm not wasting this money. So today you're learning the drums. And that was my first drum lesson, just because my brother was late. And I never really stopped after that.
We'll be back with more Spotlight On and Gustavo Cortiñas right after this break.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. This week on The Tonearm, Terrence Hannum of the post-metal band Lorcrian revisits their landmark album, The Crystal World. Composer Joanne Hitu discusses the artistic practice behind her longevity on Quebec's experimental music scene. And unconventional synth-pop duo AM Boys reveal the creative power of treating every instrument as a noise generator. You'll find all this and more on The Tonearm. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter. That's thetonearm.com. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.
And now, back to Spotlight On. So you've told me a little bit about the intellectual background and the musical background. I'm curious about geography, how the places you have lived have influenced you. And I mean, especially as a drummer, well, as a jazz musician, but a drummer in particular, Mexico, New Orleans, Chicago, these are places important places for rhythmically and for the music. I wonder if, could you talk a little bit about how those places contribute to your development?
Yeah, it's hard to talk about the places other than to tell you like I could talk about New Orleans, how I just spoke about Mexico. Like I was like in Mexico, I was exposed to all these things. Some of it was through my family. Some of it was through my friends. And if I had to speak about New Orleans, I could give you the rundown of like, oh well, jazz, and all of this, and that's like incredible, with like brass band music, traditional jazz, but also modern jazz, and people fusing New Orleans music with stuff like that. And that was it's easier for me to talk about the people, and the people which cannot be separated from the place, especially the people that I'm talking about, the people who are a part of those living organisms of music that are those cities really, really shaped me. New Orleans, being exposed to like New Orleans is a city of drummers. Johnny Vidakovich, who was my mentor when I was over there, just like, one of the most, if not the most melodic drummer I've ever heard. That was always incredibly important to me. Like I just absorbed that concept from him in my own way. And it's something that I always try to think of the drums as an extension of the harmony and the melody of the ensemble, and that's something that he really gave me, of course, like listening to guys like Herlin Riley, Shannon Powell, Troy Davis, Wayne Moreau, Jason Marsalis. I was in New Orleans when all these guys were over there, and it was just like, I can't separate them from the music, But listening to Ellis Marsalis, listening to Astral Project, Rebirth Brass Band, all this music, just being surrounded by that. And one of the really cool things about New Orleans that I've never experienced anywhere else is how, I'm going to make up a percentage, 60% of the music is happening within a walk of itself.
Yeah.
You go check out one person and you can check out everybody else. And more importantly, you go play a gig on the set break before the gig, after you set up, or after the gig before you go home. You have access to this community of music that is just packed.
Yeah.
And
All that learning that happens off the bandstand.
and that's incredible. That was really, really beautiful to hear all this really varied music happening in all this place, and to also feel this community that is built around that. Because it's not one of the greatest things about New Orleans is that it's hard to separate the music from the community. And it's one of the reasons why it produces so many great musicians and so much great music, because it doesn't separate the music from the community. The best way to learn music and the best way to grow in music is through the community, not trying to impress somebody, not trying to be taught something by somebody, but just by being there and absorbing in this kind of like organic, natural way. And then, of course, your lessons and whatnot, but there's no replacement for the community impact that music can have on people. So I guess I spoke about Mexico before, and this is kind of how I feel about New Orleans. I'd be remiss to not talk about Mexico, how like I also had like partners in crime who were studying music with me. And this is true also in New Orleans, those people that you bump into, whether it's at school or in other musical scenarios, how they grow and they show you different bands and everything. And that becomes especially important, I think, for me when I came to Chicago too, because Chicago is a very diverse city. In some ways, more, at least more, I don't want to say more diverse than New Orleans, but more cosmopolitan. People from all over the world are here. And since I've gotten here, I've been able to play with people. So yes, I was from everywhere, I was exposed to this hard driving jazz tradition that has like, the AACM and Roscoe Mitchell and those guys. And of course the blues, and yes, bebop, and also this contemporary jazz thing that's happening, and that's really incredible. But also like, I've played with people from, just to name a couple, like my friend Ngole Pokosi, who's from Cameroon. I got to basically, while I was playing with him, learn and study with him. One of my mentors, Yuri Hevia, who's from Chile, amazing drummer. And my friend Roy McGrath from Puerto Rico. I was a part of a Argentinian band with my friend Carla Campopiano. We did a couple of records influenced by tango, but with drums.
Yeah.
So all these people that are doing music that resonates with their roots, you know, and particularly my friend Yuri Hevia, he is someone who inspired me to look back at those roots, to be like, okay, this jazz journey has been really beautiful, but where do you come from? And how do you bring that into the table? And he's a huge example for that. He's one of my favorite drummers, a great friend, and just that idea of like absorbing all the music that they are bringing from their places, and all of that also being like, oh, well, they're bringing this stuff. What do I have to bring? And that inspired me to kind of also look back at my roots and even like double down.
A lot of what you just referenced too is music that, just hearing you rattle off some of that list, I think incredible lineage or set of traditions that are around rhythm and melody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just it's beautiful. And I think it dovetails into the next thing I'm curious about, which is, if you don't mind me referring to it this way, when you're making message music or music that's meant to be commenting and integrating real world themes, I'm curious how you balance that with making music that stands alone on aesthetic and artistic terms.
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing with visceral and emotional subject matter, so I would assume that helps because it's not like it analytical or sterile. I'm curious if you have to be mindful of maybe not being overly intellectual or sacrificing the art for the message, or is there anything in there that merits a discussion or talking about?
I would say that I just kind of use the inspiration, and I haven't found these intellectual ideas or these emotions as something that limits my writing, but rather as something that expands it. It makes me, it's like sitting down, and it doesn't matter what idea you have. I can have a melodic idea already that doesn't have a connotation.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, I'm going to grab that idea and I'm going to use it for this composition, for example. But then the idea is like a person grabbing the idea and being like, what kind of world am I trying to build around this? That is what kind of juice am I going to get out of the idea? How do I want to transform this idea and tell a story with it? That's where this programmatic, thematic type of approach to composition to me really proves itself to be very fructiferous. It's like where it like forces you to think, maybe not outside the box, maybe in a different box, which is to me more important. Like I always talk about how, like, if you are boundless, to get a little Hegelian about it, like pure undetermined freedom means nothing until you limit it and give it up. That's when like it realizes its potential, by limiting itself. And same with the music, so like being able to go inside a box and being like, okay, what kind of world am I trying to build if I'm trying to express these ideas? And that becomes a huge aid to me in making my music and my compositions take very different directions. If I was just sitting in front of the piano trying to make pure music, maybe it's because I'm not as great of a composer as other people in that way. Some people maybe can just flow a million contrasting ideas just out of thin air for pure aesthetics, but I'm really helped by trying to tell a different story in my music.
Mm. I hear the philosophy minor speaking.
Yeah. Perhaps.
I spoke just yesterday. I spoke with an artist. I don't know if you know Kim Perlak. She's a guitar player. She's a chair of the guitar program at Berkeley.
Nice.
Her most recent record is very much inspired by, I don't want to speak for her, but it's pretty explicit in the conversation and how she presents the album. Some natural surroundings around where she composed and recorded.
Yeah.
And she talked to me pretty explicitly about how she translated the influence of the natural world into the compositions, even through the use of extended techniques. Like, one of the things she said to me that's really stuck with me over the last 24 hours is how she was looking at a lake and watching the mist rise off it, and she was trying to figure out what that would sound like, and how she was exploring on the fretboard and through the use of extended techniques how to get to that sound. And I'm curious if there's analog for you. If you could talk a little bit about, like, you know, some of the song titles are obviously very explicit. They're little statements in and of themselves. How do you sonically get to those themes? Is it a similar process? Could you talk that process a little bit?
Yeah, it depends on the song. Every song starts in a different way, every piece. For example, I have this song, this piece called Oil and Water Don't Mix, one of my favorite pieces on the record. And for that one, I was like, okay, what illustrates that to me? And I was like, I'm going to write a counterpoint for the violin and the saxophone, because the violin and the saxophone, because counterpoint is this whole point of contrary motion and never crossing each other's lines, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of illustrates this idea of not mixing. So having these two currents that are kind of moving together. At the same time, they're kind of blending because they are playing together, but they're following a certain rule and they cannot go beyond that, you know? And at the same time, the drums, for example, in that piece, I have a main texture and I build from that texture. And the main texture is this, it's this shakers, these seeds that are used by Aztec dancers in Mexico. And a lot of times they use them in their ankles or as bracelets. I had the pleasure of collaborating with a man by the name Javier Quijas Ishayato. He participated on 2 tracks of my record, Desafío Candente, and he was kind of an eminence of Aztec and Mayan pre-Hispanic music in Mexico. He built all the instruments for Mel Gibson's Apocalypto. He played for the Dalai Lama, played for the United Nations, but he was just like a guy who made all the instruments based on stuff that he learned from the Anthropology Museum. And also he played them and has a long list of records that he made with this influence. And anyway, he collaborated on that one track, on those 2 tracks. And after that, he invited me to record with him that same weekend in LA.
Wow.
When we were recording and we were working, he was using these seeds and he explained to me, he's like, oh man, this is how I do the sound of water.
Wow.
These seeds, to bring it back to your original question. And he's like, yeah, droplets. Look, if you use it like this, it sounds like a creek far away. If you start moving, it can sound like a rain. If you start really shaking it, it can have these things. And he's like, and what we would do is we fucking pack it with reverb. And then it creates this whole thing, you know? So grabbing those types of concepts on that track, for example, be like, okay, I'm going to develop this landscape of water. I'm going to come from that thing. I'm going to build these other textures throughout the drums while I continue this texture going on. And I'm going to develop a storm out of it. So that kind of thing. And then Dave, I just let him go wild. I was like, we're going to treat this kind of like Nefertiti. That song is kind of approached a little bit like Nefertiti from Miles Davis, where the melody on that track, the melody just repeats over and over, and they never go into the solos. It ends up being a rhythm section feature with the melody carrying the pulse throughout the song. So I was like, I want to use that kind of vibe so that we have this watery flow, this storm that's growing, while we have these agents that cannot mix underneath, you know? Anyway, that's one idea of a concept.
As our time together starts to wind down, just a couple other things. On a project like this, obviously you're wearing multiple hats or performing multiple roles: performer, composer, band leader, producer, arranger, all these things. Some of those roles require you to be maybe first among equals. You know, you're especially in the band leader role, but a collaborator and a partner. How do you navigate all that? How do you are you know what, or how would you describe your style? Are you a director? Are you What's the dynamic that you're looking for?
For the most part, I like to have a conversational group environment
Mm,
where everybody gets to bring themselves. I mean, if you're going to call people like Dave, Mark, and John, you call those people because you want their voices in the project. It would be a missed opportunity to have their creativity there and not take advantage of that, not take their input, not let them loose, not let them do their thing, you know?
yeah.
I definitely like to emphasize that as much as possible. And that I think that's where the strength of the group really shines. Every once in a while, we are executing my compositions, and the compositions have sometimes an art that needs to be like expressed. For example, on basic economic farcity, I remember we had to do an extra take because I really wanted a certain arc to build throughout the thing. And we were playing this improvised solo in a particular way. And I was like, I'm okay with anything happening in the solo. I'm just asking that we need to end here because we're going to lead to the end of the melody in this really big thing, you know, and it's not happening. And it was like, oh, it's like, and I had to be like, no, it's not happening. And we need to do it. Like,
It
it'll
will
happen,
happen.
you know? So things like that, where like, and that's like a balance. There are when, especially with program music, I guess, if you're trying to create a picture, you want to bring the piece and you want to get all these visions and all these creativity from all your partners into creating that picture. But if the picture's not happening, then you have to step in a little bit and direct a little bit. And honestly, all these guys are really great and really humble, and they are open to creating the picture.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I have to ask, you've mentioned now a couple of times you've used the term program music. When I think about that tradition, I think I have a too small of a definition of it. My understanding, and I'm not a musicologist or I'm not a academic in this regard, but my understanding is that it's music that interprets or is inspired by specific texts. Is that incorrect, or is your music inspired by any specific texts here?
Not this one particularly. I do have like my previous record, Desafío Candente, is inspired by Eduardo Galeano's Open Bass for Latin America. My understanding of program music is that sometimes like the music can come with a text, like a little program that has text that explains it, kind of like the liner notes on the record are. The liner notes would be that record. And it's not actually that the liner notes inspired the music, but rather that they're an accompanying program that allows it. There are some instances like Desafío Candente, like Vivaldi's Spring, for example, where like that first movement, actually, there's like a very clear text that go with it. And you can hear the references in his melodies orchestration that depict that text, you know?
Yeah.
But there's also like Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique, for example,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
had no actual pre-existing text, but he like was just kind of like obsessed with Harriet Smith, this actress. Do you know the story of that one? He wrote this amazing piece of music, Symphonie Fantastique it's called.
Yeah.
You can go on YouTube and look up a video, and there's like, they're actually like telling you, because he wrote a program in which actually he tells you, yeah, this is what I call the idée fixe, the fixed idea that I have of my ideal loved person and stuff like that. It was like a really dysfunctional, obsessive relationship. And he wrote a whole symphony about it. And there's like some clear themes that are there. And he wrote a little program for it. So it's a wide variety. It can also be like Debussy's La Mer.
It's more fluid. Yeah.
It's fluid, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Before I
if
let,
it's not, we'll make it fluid.
thank you. We get to decide. Before I let you go, I wonder, so when we end our call and you go about your day, what's some of the next music you're most likely to be listening to?
Okay. Do you mind if I go on my Spotify and go to the stuff that I've been listening to lately, or do you want it off the head? Just
Like you said, we get to make the rules, man.
the rules. Let's see. I'll tell you that I've been revisiting some of my punk days recently, so I've been reviewing all of that. I've got a couple records up here where I've been doing this thing that if I like bump into one of my friends, I ask them some of the stuff that they've been listening to.
Better than any algorithm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't algorithm at all. I just have records right here. So I have a couple. I bumped into a friend of mine who does a lot of fusion-y type stuff, but sometimes leaning to more of a rock thing. But he's a very inspired traditional musician from Mexico. And so he recommended this Grupo Jaranero. And this, so that's at the top of the list. But the last thing that I listened to was We Get Requests by Oscar Peterson.
Nice.
I've been listening a lot to I listen a lot to Brian Blades, one of my favorite drummers.
Oh, mine too. Mike, you talk about melodic drumming. Jesus Christ.
Melodic
and vibe.
Interactive, dynamic, the whole thing. And recently, I hadn't listened to this record when it came out. It just kind of slipped my radar. But a friend of mine played for me Still Dreaming. It's Joshua Radman record with Ron Miles. And that's been blowing my ears quite a bit. A wider range, some Mexican traditional music, a little bit of punk, definitely a little bit of Brian Blade, Joshua Redman stuff, and yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. That'll give me some stuff to go revisit. I try not to listen to the same things over and over again.
I do the opposite, by the way.
Yeah.
I try to.
Well, I definitely go down rabbit holes for sure. Thank you for making time.
Thank you, Lars. Appreciate you. It was a lot of fun talking. Thanks for doing some background on me as well.
Of course. Thank you so much, Gustavo Cortiñas. And as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On. Spotlight On is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant. Our theme music is by Q-Burn's Abstract Message. Thank you so much for supporting our work. Please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and then visit us online at spotlightonpodcast.com. There you can explore the free episode archive. For more interviews and writings from me and a diverse array of contributors, check out thetonearm.com. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.